Councilmember Burt. Councilmember Holman. Councilmember Klein. Councilmember Price. Councilmember Scharf. Councilmember Schmidt. Vice Mayor Niss. Mayor Shepard. 7 present.
Thank you. And can you turn your mics on so they can record? Oh, we're on air. So tonight we're doing interviews for the Planning and Transportation Commission, and we've got, these are 15-minute interviews. And our first person to interview is Lynn Tillery, to be followed by Asher Thank you, Waldfogel. Yeah, you all know my pronunciation skills.
Oh,
Hi.
Awesome. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lynn. Nice to meet you all.
Welcome. If you'd like to give us just a few minutes of introduction, and then we will be, we like to ask questions.
Okay,
And then you
perfect.
can have the time to summarize at the end.
So I actually brought a couple of copies of my interview for people to share. I didn't print out 10 copies because I wanted to be kind of paper conscious, but so.
We're not as paper conscious as we ought to be. Thanks.
So as you probably read in my application, my name is Lynn. I've been a Palo Alto resident since 2010. I moved here originally from Los Angeles, California for grad school, and I've just kind of stuck around and enjoyed living in Palo Alto. If you kind of take a look at my resume, I have mostly a healthcare background, but I do have an MPA with a concentration in health policy specifically. I was really interested in applying for the PTC because I want to kind of serve and give back to my community. I've been in Palo Alto for a while now. I'm more settled, and I'm interested in really being more involved in my neighborhood, and I see a lot of changes taking place since I live in downtown Palo Alto. I also work for the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital, which is now Stanford Children's Health. And so I see a lot of impact of that as well. And I know we work closely with a lot of the businesses within the city. So that's kind of a synopsis of me and why I applied.
Okay. Colleagues, anybody would like to go first?
Want me to jump in?
Sure. Vice Mayor.
So I have
Niss?
almost an identical background to you.
That means you're awesome.
I did my MPA in exactly the same field. And it's pretty far afield from this. Oh, thanks, Mark. So you said you're living downtown and you have observed a number of the changes that have taken place in the downtown. So to go on, planning and transportation is all about land use, as you know. So is that a particular avocation of yours, or something that you have concentrated on in the past, or is it just general interest that you have?
A combination. It's twofold. So I'm not sure if my mic's still on, but so when I was in LA, I worked with Karen Bass. He used to be actually the Speaker of the State Senate, and I did a lot with her on planning, just city planning in general, with her constituents, and kind of getting them involved in more invested in what was going on. And so I thought that this kind of aligned with that, as well as some of the impacts of all the construction and traffic in general. I thought that I would be able to offer some expertise into those areas as well.
Greg?
He mentioned pedestrian node on
Mm-hmm.
give a little description of what you see.
Sure. So I've seen a lot of nodes that surround kind of the Caltrain station as well, but there's also kind of really busy pedestrian hubs that are around a lot of the eateries. So the street right up here where the parking structure is kind of a huge bottleneck as well. El Camino specifically, Town and Country is a huge node, as well as going towards more south in Palo Alto. We have a number of shuttles that we kind of try to help city residents and people that travel in the area use to kind of lessen some of those bottlenecks. But I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of an example.
Large in circumference, and one of the problems with El Camino is very narrow.
Mm-hmm.
Your mic on?
It is now.
So the narrowness makes it difficulty to think of a development of a node.
And when I think about nodes in particular, because I'm a chemistry undergrad, so I think about wavelengths, right? And so the moves of different things in nodes is where there's no movement usually, right? And so I'm kind of applying it similarly to this. You said it's an area that's narrow, there's a lot of bottleneck. This mic is going in and out, sorry. I'm loud enough where I don't really need it. So.
It's for record. You don't
Yeah.
have to use it to project, it's just to pick up.
Oh, okay.
Just because
Awesome.
you're on the air.
Oh, got it. Okay. So, yeah,
Good, wavelength.
wavelength.
Good, thank you.
Gail?
Welcome.
Thanks.
I have a couple questions. One, you mentioned the shuttle system. You use that to gain mobility. Are you talking about the Marguerite system to get to work, or do you use the Palo Alto shuttle or VTA public buses?
I actually use both because I am, so my main office site is in Bohannon in Menlo Park, so I use that shuttle a bunch from the Menlo Park Caltrain station, but I also travel throughout our different satellite offices, and so I take the Marguerite as well as the Palo Alto shuttle, so a combination.
Got it. And also, do you have any observations about the built environment, architecture, or design in terms of what you see evolving within the community and any observations you may have?
I know you guys are really interested in keeping the character of Palo Alto intact, right? And kind of being able to deal with the flux in terms of increased population, construction, et cetera. So, I mean, in general, it seems like it's still a really nicely built, quaint town. There's bike lanes and things of that sort, but there are some changes with some of the construction, and I think not really aligning with some of the traditional structures that are in place here in downtown specifically. So there's a new, the Survey Monkey building is pretty modern, right? And so there is a lot of sidewalk space and things of that sort, but it doesn't really fall in line aesthetically with what is already here, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Pat?
Hi.
Hi.
Are you familiar with our comprehensive plan and to any degree our zoning code? And as you may be aware, we're updating our comprehensive plan, and I'm just interested in your thoughts about where we are with the old one and what changes perhaps should occur in the new one.
So I looked at it briefly, and I know that it's still being revised, right? And so there are a number of things that you have yet to talk about. Specifically, I was really interested in kind of learning more about like the status of the amendment, where that is, and also speaking more to housing affordability and availability within this area. As a young professional that doesn't work for a startup that's not IPO'd, right? I have a limited income, and I am interested in staying in Palo Alto and hopefully becoming a homeowner in this area. And so currently I can't do that, right? I just don't have the income or means. Maybe if I marry rich, it'll happen, but right now I don't have that means. So just talking about that a little bit more. And also I looked at some of the zoning ordinances, and I think there was a lot of information. It was really dense and convoluted. And I think that we need to be able to translate that in a way that is more reader and user-friendly for the constituents. Everyone doesn't have an MPA or experience in reading comprehensive plans, and I think that I could maybe help with that as well.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Larry?
Thank you, and thank you for applying. The city has long had a 50-foot height limit, and we've had some interesting discussions in recent years about whether or not we should modify that, allow projects to exceed it, or whether we should keep it, make it even stricter, or any intermediate position? Do you have any views on the 50-foot height limit?
I think we should make it higher. I think the cityscape will still be beautiful. We need more space for apartments, right? Or rental housing units. So why not? I don't have a problem with it in terms of density or height in general.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a question. What kind of place do you see as Palo Alto on the peninsula and as, you know, its future? What is your vision of Palo Alto's future?
So I see Palo Alto changing a lot, right, in terms of not just the residents. It's becoming a little bit more diverse, more. I think it's always been family friendly, but it's becoming more family friendly. There's more young professionals that are interested in living in a more suburban environment as opposed to living in San Francisco or San Mateo or Redwood City. And so I see it changing in that scope. It's always been really innovative, and hopefully it can continue along that scope. I also see a huge need for the city council and the boards to reflect the growing change in diversity and to impact that voice as well.
When you say diversity, could you describe that for me?
So I'm speaking about women, professionals, different races. There's no one of African American descent on the board or in the city council, so things of that nature specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Karen?
Yes, following up on the density question, so you rightly address that aspect of density, of diversity, but how do you purport or suppose that we might address the other aspects of diversity, like different income levels?
So I think that once we have more variance or variety in the terms of housing that is available, we can offer different types of subsidized housing or non-subsidized, just different housing levels for different people that have different incomes. So I just think we have issues with space, right? And so that's why it's important to kind of take a more innovative approach. There are a lot of new housing models that use smaller floor plans as well as like co-op type structures. And so exploring some of those, maybe planning proposals that may be in the pipeline.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Mark. Sorry.
So you, in your application, and thank you for applying, in your application you mentioned, and I've lost where it is now, but something about kind of housing supply, and that's become a topic of conversation in the current city council race, and you know, we have a pretty big jobs housing imbalance, and where in the city, you know, if you were to advocate for additional housing, where would you advocate for that housing, and what types of housing would you, you know, think would best kind of fit the needs that we have?
I still think there are a lot of undeveloped areas, not really undeveloped, right, but areas for expansion or possible expansion on Alma, as well as in kind of traditional historic Palo Alto. There are a lot of areas then housing units that can be made into kind of bigger apartments. I know there is issues with like space and parking around. So I live on Hamilton right now, and so right behind my apartment building, they have taken kind of a different approach to using the lot. So they're making it 3 kind of linear luxury houses next to each other, and so kind of maybe thinking about that as well and using lot space a little bit more efficiently.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Vice Mayor had another question for you.
So because on number 2, you went very specifically into, thanks Pat, very specifically into parking, and I can tell that you're concerned about it. So tell us again, your parking situation is you don't have any place to park other than on the street. Am I correct?
Yeah, and I actually also took the residential parking survey that you guys sent out. So currently I live in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. We have 1 parking spot, so we have to park on the street. Yeah. it sucks because sometimes I work really late and there might not necessarily be parks available. I don't want to walk in the dark. I live right by the Caltrain station. So there's challenges that I'm currently having to face. And sometimes, I mean, I live close enough that I can possibly even go home for lunch. But if I go home for lunch, there's no parks because there's construction, trucks everywhere, and permits and zones saying you can't park somewhere and this. And so I think maybe, I know in other cities where it's really busy, they have residential permit parking that they use, and so maybe that's an alternative as well that we can employ so residents have a place to park, because we don't currently have that or haven't noticed it.
Yeah, we're moving into that, and that's why I wanted to, as at the beginning of January, that's why I wanted to hear specifically from you what was really, you know, like in that situation, since you mentioned that on your application. Thank you.
Well, we have about 30 seconds if you want to just give us one last pitch.
So I think that not only am I kind of, I can bring a lot of new voice and experience and a kind of a more broad and diverse perspective to the commission. I'm really hardworking, I have time, I'm interested in investing in Palo Alto, and I'm going to be here for the long run. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time out to interview me today.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes.
I think you just put it down.
That's
Yeah,
perfect.
just put it down.
Thanks for your work with Karen Bass. I really liked her and really enjoyed working with her.
She's done a lot too.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next interview is with Asher. Yeah, that's, yeah.
Do I take the hot seat here?
Yes, you do, and you've been through the interview process before, but if you'd like to do a little introduction, and then we'll go into questions.
Okay, sure. I'm Asher Waldfogel. I've been in Palo Alto for 20 years. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I've started a number of venture-backed companies with successful exits. I'm currently an innovation consultant. I've also been on the Utilities Commission now for 6 years. Still have 2 years remaining on a term. And when I saw there were vacancies on the Planning Commission, I thought this might be a great time to throw my hat in the ring, because I think there's some really interesting and difficult problems facing the city around planning, transportation, other issues. So that's why I'm here today. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. Anybody want to jump in? Okay, Pat, and then Greg.
So Asher, as you're probably aware, we're in the midst of our update to our comprehensive plan, and we've had discussions about whether our zoning ordinance changes that we might be considering should await until the comprehensive plan update is complete. I don't necessarily want to put you in a position of which sequence we should follow, but just in the context of those two topics, what do you think are the important issues that may be involved as we move from the old comp plan to the next one, and how might some of those things translate into changes in our zoning code in the future?
Oh, great, thanks. I mean, this is always a difficult question, but I think one of the challenges with comprehensive plans, I mean, with any kind of master plan or strategic plan, is that it's often hard to express intent in an umbrella document. In fact, I've gone through a lot of planning exercises in my career, and I've finally realized that most planning most strategic plans boil down to we do stuff for people who want stuff like what we do, and so that the challenge with comprehensive plans is to be a little more intentful and specific. And that's why I think that the zoning is actually more important at some level than the comprehensive plan, because it dictates what actually happens on the ground. I mean, generally a comprehensive plan will have air cover for a number of different intents. And I think it's important for us at this point in time to express what our overall vision and intent for the city is over the next 10 or 15 years, so that we can actually work toward that and make sure that we implement that in code. And then just to add on to this, I've spent more time than I would like looking at our zoning codes, our planning codes, our building codes, and they are very well intentioned. They're full of enthusiasms. They're full of good ideas. As they get amended, they rarely get adequately cross-checked. So, they're just all kinds of places where they're just, again, are not intentful. You can It's hard to discern what people are trying to do in different sections of the code. It's hard to discern, in many cases, what they actually mean. It comes down to interpretation through staff. And that creates other problems because developers, builders, homeowners, architects never really know what we really mean, and they have to go consult with staff and say, well, what did you mean when you wrote this, and then you wrote this other thing that contradicts it, and this third thing that maybe modifies it? So nobody really knows.
I've got Greg.
Asher, thanks for your many years of analytic service on the UAC. And let me just follow up the conversation you were having. You use the phrase, results the city wants, intent. Can you give a little idea of what you think the intention of the building and planning code should be?
Well, I think it's hard for me to answer that in a really specific way here and now. But I think that we need to express intent. I mean, we need to say, is our intent to continue to be a 20th century garden community? Is our intent to be a more urbanized community? Is our intent that part of town will be one thing, another part of town will be something else? But I think we have to capture that and express that and make that clear. I think that a lot of friction in the town right now, it comes because people are doing things that are explicitly allowed under current planning and zoning, but are leading to consequences that aren't necessarily intents that are compatible with, say, R1 residential purposes. And so we just have to be clear.
So the clarity should come in the comp plan itself, or at least in the zoning changes that are derived from it.
Well, in an ideal world, the comp plan would express intents. It would say that this part of town, or it would say perhaps this part of town does have some kind of residential intent, or this part of town has some other intent, has commercial or office or, light manufacturing or, whatever we want to do. But I just don't think we've done a good job of that. I don't know exactly what the document hierarchy should be, whether we should capture that in the comp plan, or whether the comp plan is more of an umbrella document and we need a third document that is kind of a 5-year intent plan. I mean, there are different ways we could architect this process, and I'm not sure that I know the right answer.
Good. Thank you.
Liz?
So, Usher, that's my neighbor.
Yes.
This is an interesting question to ask, but you've brought it up in your application, which says you're the owner of one of the most published residential projects in Palo Alto history, and in my observation, a reasonably controversial one, since I live close by. Tell me, I'm not going to talk about the residential aspect of it, which we have far less to do with, but as you look at the buildings downtown, some of which are quite modern, quite different, tell us what your reaction is to that. The last candidate just spoke about one building that she thought maybe wasn't in character. Go someplace with that.
Okay, well, so character is a hard thing to do, and I serve on. Oh, I'm sorry. I love the echo. And just FYI, I also serve on the board of an art school that has an architecture school. So I don't really have style biases. I really have quality biases. And in general, my general observation about what gets built in Palo Alto is that we get projects that are less good than we deserve. And you may have some opinions about whether my specific building is you and I may disagree about that. The design community that I spend time with thinks that the building that I built is very high quality, is very well designed.
And I would agree with that, but how do you establish what good quality is in our downtown? What's good quality in the central part of Palo Alto near University Avenue?
Well, so you're asking me for what, design and aesthetic principles, or?
Well, you used the word, so that's why I'm trying to think what good means.
good is, first of all, something that expresses, I mean, I keep coming back to the word intent, but a lot of buildings we have don't really express a designer's intent. I mean, often I'll see things where I'll look at things and I'll say, okay, somebody read the code and they saw, here's the permitted building envelope. I'm going to take something like a daylight plane as as a stipulated building envelope, instead of saying I'm actually going to go and design something that is useful and interesting and durable. We just have not seen very many projects that have brought in good quality talent, good quality architects to get the quality we deserve. Stanford has done an extremely good job of bringing in very good architects. I mean, Palo Alto has a history of this. This building was designed by Edward Durrell Stone, who, is controversial in his late career, but somebody who was really a stretch architect. I mean, we don't hire people as good as that right now to do the projects that we're doing today, and that depresses me a little bit.
Thanks.
Greg?
Hi, Asher, and thanks for applying. So I've worked with you for, I don't know, 4 years roughly.
Yeah, actually more than that, something like that.
Something like that, as the liaison to the UAC for most of that. And I found you to probably be the most data-driven member of the UAC. Do you have any sense of bringing that data-driven aspect to planning and transportation?
I would love to do that. I mean, the prerequisite is that we need good data. Right now we have data getting collected in many different ways. Some of it is, good quality. Some of it is suspect quality. But we need to bring in data. We need to understand our legal frameworks, both our legal obligations, but also what are our degrees of freedom, as we look at possible alternatives. What are degrees of freedom in county, state, and federal law. But we absolutely need to make decisions based on good information, and there's a lot of information we honestly don't have today.
So that's what I wanted to follow up. Where do you think we're lacking that information in terms of our planning process?
I don't think we know very much today about how our urban spaces are occupied. We don't really know who's coming and going on a daily basis. We don't really know where they're coming from, where they're going, how they move through our urban spaces. I don't think we know how many uniques we have appearing in our urban spaces each day or each week, or how, whether it's the same pattern, same people every day. I don't think we know the relationship between how people come and go in the city and then what spaces they occupy, once they're in the city, whether it's office space or commercial space or restaurants or shopping or whatever they're doing. I just don't think we know very much about movement. And without that knowledge, it's really hard to make good decisions.
Karen?
Thank you for applying. Good to see you. So it seemed like in some of your earlier responses, you'd been listening to a lot of council meetings. So which I imagine you have.
I'd like to sit at the feet of the...
So I have copies of older zoning codes from Palo Alto and even other communities, and they're about this thick.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, but it was a different time. People built, from my perspective, people built historically based on need and want, not based on, investment as much.
Mm-hmm.
So when you mention people build like, okay, here's a daylight plane, your comment about that, I don't need to repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going to define what the building looks like. How do you change that? So that's well, I'll just leave it at that. How do you change that?
Well,
What I'm at, let me add on to that, just one more thing while you're thinking about that, is I agree with you 100% about like the architects and quality of architects, no offense to anyone, but we do have a rich history of architects that are famous architects that have worked here. What about that? You can't require somebody to hire X, Y, or Z architects, so how do you address that?
well, I think that's a really good question. I mean, one of the things that we need to move away from is the idea of building for investment. I mean, I think one of our problems right now is we have a lot of speculative building going on. We have a lot of absentee ownership. We have a whole bunch of complicated social, political, economic issues that are coming together. I was just in London last week, and you should talk to them about real estate. I mean, every conversation there leads to real estate. It's about, I just bought a flat over in, wherever, Covent Garden, and it's up 30% in the last, 9 months. Every single conversation. And it's all driven by, in their case, by foreign money. I don't have any data to know what's driving real estate in Palo Alto. But I think if we can move a little bit away from a speculative mindset to, a mindset of settlers, people occupying the space, that'll start to get us thinking in slightly different ways.
I don't disagree, but how do you do that? How do we forge that kind of different mindset?
Well,
the tools we have to work with are the comp plan, the zoning code, and those sorts of tools.
Yeah, well, it's also questions about, this gets back to my point about what are our degrees of freedom. What flexibility do we have under, state or federal law to promote, local ownership, or to discourage absentee development, absentee ownership? I just don't know the answers to these questions yet. This is slightly above my legal pay grade as of today.
Mark, we're not going to have time. One more. Real quick. We've got 1 minute.
Sorry, I've been long.
Okay.
I'll try to be quick with my question. You kind of mentioned in your desire of what the ideal type of building would be is something useful, interesting, durable, high quality. What if a proposal were to come across the Planning and Transportation Commission that you felt met all those, kind of metrics, but deviates from the code a little bit? So it exceeded the height limit by a couple of feet, or there was some other exemption that they were asking for. What would your attitude be towards that type of stuff?
So what I think is interesting is that when you look at some of the older buildings in town that we venerate, they wouldn't all meet every single detail of the current code. So I think it's important for us to look at proposals in context. I know some people are very dogmatic about certain things, but I think that if something is good, that we should find a way to work with it. And if we can, in an ideal world, we'd find things that are good that we can pull all the way inside the regulatory envelope. And I think really great architects respond to constraints, and we'll try to work toward that. And then you've got commercial aspects to this as well.
Thank you.
And that concludes. I'm sorry, we don't have time for a minute, but
okay.
yeah, thank you very much. You were very dynamic with your question, with your answers. So there's a lot of dialogue. So
that's okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today. Appreciate it.
thank you. And our next applicant is Claude Ezron, another former commissioner. So. No, HRC, yeah.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. So I'm Claude Ezron. I've been a resident of Palo Alto for over 20 years. And I'm interested in the Planning and Transportation Commission, but I would not come to the position with a hidden agenda or set personal agenda. I think my unique desire here is, as I've done at the HRC and other volunteer opportunities, to serve Palo Alto and the community to the best of my abilities, and to use analytical skills and to make decisions as much as possible. It's not always possible, but as much as possible based on facts and data. You kindly selected me twice, to be on HRC, so you might wonder, what's my track record? And very briefly, in a nutshell, I definitely mentioned World Music Day. When I interviewed for the HRC, I mentioned I was thinking about doing it. Well, it has been going on for 6 months, 6 years in a row now. And also, I have to mention, when I was chair, we put together a very comprehensive survey of human services needs in Palo Alto, which I think was widely recognized as a very good document, very useful by council and others. And also, I think the fact that we were able to convince the city council to increase funding for his RAP, I think was also a positive achievement for the city and the community. Finally, I have to say, I'm aware, there is a huge it's a very steep, learning curve to be on the Planning and Transportation Commission. It's very technical. I won't claim I know everything. You'll probably see it tonight when you show you me. But I think I have a head start first, being on HRC because, we had to, as a commission, to review some of the documents such as the housing elements. I've also participated in many community meetings like such as Palo Alto and others on the rail corridor. And finally, I have to say, I did, in 2009 and 10, I did build my own house in Palo Alto. So that was quite a learning experience. And in fact, it was at a time when Curtis Williams and the staff were wondering how to improve the process. So I met with him. I gave him quite a few suggestions. Some of them, I'm glad, it's not just due to me, but some of them were implemented, and there might be others to look at down the road.
All right. Gail.
Welcome. Nice to see you again. What were the driving factors to have you decide to apply to planning and transportation? And what is your vision of Palo Alto over the next 10 to 15 years?
Okay, interesting question. First, I'd been 6 years on the HRC. I love the time there, but I think it was time to see something different. And I think the Planning and Transportation Commission is probably the one that has one of the commissions, maybe with the UAC, that has the most impact on the city. So I thought that was appealing to me. I think I always try to have an impact in what I do. In terms of my vision for the city, I think there are.
Just keep the bottom of the mic off.
Okay. I think we need to preserve the quality of life in Palo Alto. We need to strike a balance between different competing interests and listen to the community. I think we have many challenges. Palo Alto is very attractive as a city, so there are many people who want to come in, and we'll have to continue to manage issues such as parking, transportation. I think we could certainly improve the public transportation situation in Palo Alto, and I would say probably regionally. It's maybe more even a job for you than for the Commission. I think many of the solutions will have to be regional in nature.
Larry?
Two questions. Let's draw on your experience. Thank you, Mark. And building your own house. And you said you made some suggestions to improve our process to the then Director of Planning and Community Development. So what ones weren't adopted that you think we ought to?
Okay, so one that was not, I think, adopted was to do customer surveys. And I purposefully use the word customer, because I think it's important for an administration to really understand that people who build a house in Palo, our customers first, we know we pay substantial fees, and it's a question of attitude. And when I was going to the development center, it was very clear that some folks there were extremely customer-oriented, very nice, and some were not. So along those same lines, my suggestion was that, and I don't know if it has been adopted or not, but I not heard it was to give more customer training to people who are facing customers, so that they know how to behave in front of customers. Because I think it raises the quality level, when everybody is trained to do that. People who work with the public in private enterprise, are often trained on how to interface with customers, with difficult customers. Another suggestion I had was to increase the fees, as a matter of fact, but have probably a faster track for people who are willing to pay more. Because one of the things I made them realize was that time is money. When you build a house, you have this huge asset that's unused, and I told them it was like my case, about $400 a day. So, I was willing to pay a lot more if I could just speed things up. Sometimes I was waiting 6 weeks for something that was very simple to decide upon.
Greg?
Well, and thank you very much for your service on World Music Day. It's really a fantastic celebration. I appreciate the efforts you make on that. So, thinking back on the Planning and Transportation Commission, is there anything in particular that you would have voted differently, that where they passed something and you would have voted differently and you think it should have been changed? And also on the converse, is there something you'd also like to see that hasn't happened in Palo Alto?
I don't think, I went through some minutes and watched some of the meetings online, and I've been an observer of the Commission for a while, and I cannot put my finger on something specific I disagreed with. I think that I like to see more effort in looking at solutions for parking and transportation. I'm a strong believer in using the assets you have. I used to work for Intel, and I was in finance at the time, and before authorizing the purchase of $1 million testers, one thing that we were looking at was capacity utilization. And for instance, I've never been in this parking down here when it was full. I've never seen full. So I think having things like, and I think the city is starting to look at that. Electronic signs to count the spaces could make a lot of sense here and in other buildings. I think that I like, if I'm a commission, to certainly look more at public transportation issues. I think the less cars we have. And one last thing I would mention was, we have now some bicycles that are available for the public to borrow, to rent. I like to see how it goes, to see if it's successful or not. If not, analyze why, and if it's successful, maybe expand that so that we have even more people using them.
You said public and transportation and bicycling opportunities. Is there anything in specific that you would suggest that we're not already doing? And public transportation, what are you thinking given, shuttles are a separate issue?
I think shuttles are just is part of the whole solution. I think it's important to look at the connection between different public transportation systems. I was looking at it for my daughter was at UC Davis, and it's amazing. But if you want to transfer from Amtrak to BART, there is only one station, Richmond, where you can do that. It's crazy, it doesn't connect. So I think connections between different modes of transportation are very important. I think Stanford did a lot of transportation demand management, although obviously they have probably more means of applying pressure on the employees than we would have with people who come from everywhere. But I think there might be some lessons to learn from what they did. Maybe we can certainly have some influence on our residents at least.
Thanks.
I was going to ask a question, and then Karen, what is your vision for Palo Alto going into the future when it comes to the planning? Do you see it growing a lot, or what is your thinking about height limits, that kind of thing? Where are you? What's your framework on that?
I think it's a big debate in Palo Alto. I think I'm kind of on the moderate side. I don't think you can say no growth at all. If no growth means death. And I think that we are like a living organism. We evolve. We need to be flexible. I think what I certainly like to see happen is improvement in the infrastructure of Palo Alto, like for instance the safety building. That's something really that's important, and improvements in streets and paving and stuff like that. So to answer your question, I view ideally some slow, moderate growth.
Okay.
Not a whole lot of huge developments, and if we have to develop things, maybe we should put them close to transit centers, like close to California Avenue or University Avenue. But also, let's make sure that if we put people close to transit centers, the question remains, are they using this or not? And I'll mention one more thing about public transportation. I think it would be useful for the city and maybe to talk to other cities and see what's going on with all the buses that are coming to bring employees to their work locations, like Google and Facebook. In some ways, it's very good because it takes people off their cars. But if you look in the long run, it does tend to undermine public transportation. So I think I would love to see the city, again, with some of its neighbors, talk to these companies and think about a long-term plan, in terms of public transportation.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
So can you identify what you would consider a recent successful project and what makes it successful? Or in the contrary, or in the contrast, maybe something that isn't you'd think successful and why not?
You're talking about like a specific building in Palo Alto? Or?
Yeah, and maybe commercial, anywhere in town.
I think that some of the buildings that you see in Palo Alto are not very nice looking. I'm thinking about is it like 800 Alma Street, for instance? It's not. It looks like it has been compared, I think, to a middle-age fortress, something like that, with the windows. So it's not. It could have been designed better, at least. I'm not questioning the whole building, but the look of it. I think it's important also to maybe have some sidewalks that are a bit large, so that you're not facing something huge, up front. So we need to look at that. What has not been so successful, I think the Mitchell Library, was a very difficult project. But I just visited it today, with the Palo Alto Recreation Foundation. But I think it will be soon forgotten that it was a difficult project. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful asset for the city.
Well, thank you. You've got a half a minute if you'd like to give us your last pitch.
So I think my last pitch is, as I said, I've been interested in some of these issues, first on the HRC and also building my house and attending many of the meetings. And I think I would bring a lot of analytical skills. I don't claim I know everything, but when I said I would organize World Music Day, I've never done that before, and I was able to get it off the ground and improve it over the years, and I would bring the same attitude to this position.
Well, thank you very much for applying. And first off, Karen, what's the score?
First time, 2-2.
Okay.
And it's the top of the sixth.
All right.
0 outs.
It's going to be a long game. Okay. All right. Arthur, you are next.
Thank you.
And go ahead and jump in with your introduction. Of course. Pass it down.
Thank you. If you could pass those things down, I appreciate it. No, there's packets. There are packets, and they're all. There's paper clips holding the packets together.
So that's an extra one right there.
No, push it down.
There you go. Have a packet.
Is there missing one on this side?
We're good.
Yeah,
Great,
we're
thank you.
good. All right, Arthur, go ahead.
Thank you for interviewing me. I'm completing my second term on the PTC. From Monday's joint session, you already know how much work that is and how productive the PTC has been. A little away, thank you. As you may know, there is precedent for serving more than 2 terms on the PTC. Former PTC Commissioner Phyllis Castle served for 13 years. As most of the current commissioners have served for less than 4 years, I believe my experience is useful for continuity and mentoring new commissioners. I bring the powerful combination of decision-making based on data and creative problem-solving. I'd like to highlight some examples of creative problem-solving. I've been proposing we explore annual growth caps based on a point system that prioritizes meritorious projects, and that we explore an expanded use of transferable development rights for managing growth downtown. I've led the shift in thinking from transit-oriented housing to housing near services because my analysis shows that transit use among Palo Alto residents is so low. Palo Alto is different from East Bay cities that are bedroom communities for San Francisco. And I've highlighted the MTC's own data that jobs near fixed rail transit, like Caltrain or BART, encourages transit use twice as much as housing near transit. I will present 2 examples of how my experience in the PTC combined with my focus on decision-making based on data are important. I've been data mining the Census Transportation Planning Package, CTPP, for 2006 to 2010, which is the latest data available. And although jobs have increased since then and Caltrain use has also increased, the data still contains useful revelations. I've given you copies of my analysis of data extracted from this data source that supports these examples, and you can review these at your convenience. First, the U.S. Census Bureau classifies the Stanford campus as part of the city of Palo Alto. So the jobs housing imbalance for Palo Alto is inflated since it uses the actual number of residents for Palo Alto compared with a combined jobs figure for Palo Alto and Stanford. That error has big implications for Palo Alto. That error has big implications for Palo Alto. It most likely inflates our ABAG RENA numbers. Hopefully the new business registry will provide real jobs data to correct that as input to the next RENA cycle. Second, Caltrain use for the Stanford Research Park is rather low, so it has the highest drive-alone rate in Palo Alto. That results in ever worsening traffic if we can't increase transit use. Fortunately, the cause, the last mile problem, can be addressed. It is hard to get from Caltrain to the Stanford Research Park. The VTA 89 bus runs very infrequently from the California Avenue Caltrain station. If we cannot convince the VTA to increase service, perhaps the TMA serving the Stanford Research Park could provide more adequate service from the University Avenue station to encourage Caltrain use. The TMA could also provide a guaranteed ride home for those who work late. This service is part of the Stanford Transportation Program to meet their no new trips requirement, and which has been highly successful. Increasing transit use for the Stanford Research Park will reduce our traffic impacts. I think that by serving another term, I can bring my experience to help address the issues that face Palo Alto. Thank you.
Okay, Greg.
Arthur, thanks for your quantitative data that you shared not only tonight but informally over the last couple years you've shared with members of the council. Let me just ask one specific question that is in your resume. You say one of your goals is to quantify public benefits. How would you think through the issue of quantifying public benefits?
There are some benefits that are quantifiable. For example, the 101 Linton project did make a contribution to various funds of the city, and those actually are clearly quantifiable. Less quantifiable are providing low-income housing. For example, if you have a 100% affordable low-income housing project. But I think that one can think about how much the city might spend to provide that equivalent benefit and how much that might cost, and that allows for one to do some sort of quantification. And in terms of for example, PC zone, one could look at the project and what its value would be without the increased zoning allowance, and what its value would be at the increased zoning allowance, and that allows you to clearly quantify with standard appraisal techniques what the benefit is to the developer.
Good, thank you.
Larry?
Do you think the jobs housing situation is really a problem, or whether it's something manufactured by Sacramento bureaucrats. And if you do think it's a problem, how would you address it in Palo Alto? And further, if you still think it's a problem, can you identify any cities in the world, any job centers, I should say, in the world, which didn't have, and history as well, that didn't have a jobs housing imbalance?
Well, first of all, I've been an advocate of saying that it's not a jobs housing balance. It's actually a jobs housing transportation triangle. And so therefore, what happens is that people are getting from jobs to housing and between jobs and housing, and they do that through transportation. Some of the modes of transportation are walking and biking. Some of the modes are taking transit use. One of the things about that is that if you look at, for example, Manhattan as an island, it is an island, and there's a tremendous amount of transportation network that is built around Manhattan. And if Manhattan were its own city, we'd say, oh, there's a horrible jobs housing imbalance in Manhattan. And yet there's a whole wonderful transportation network around Manhattan that has more than half of the daily transit riders in the entire country.
Let me follow up on that just a bit. So what do you think Palo Alto's response should be to the idea that we have a jobs housing imbalance?
I think our response should be that we are essentially a built-out city, and we can provide some degree of housing. And I think we should try to focus on the housing that we build on providing additional diversity, because I think that we're losing diversity in Palo Alto, income diversity, quite rapidly. But I think that we should basically say that you wouldn't think about putting lots of housing in the financial district of San Francisco. There's basically a region around there, and it's because of the arbitrary division of the Bay Area into cities that have arbitrary shapes that Palo Alto essentially is given that large number of arena allocation because of our jobs.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Ness, or Liz.
So earlier,
Yeah.
earlier you heard a question or a comment about, thanks, Karen, about quality in our downtown. And I'm interested in knowing how you think, because you've been on planning and transportation for a while, how do you think some of your decisions have affected what we've heard tonight are not always high-quality buildings?
Well, firstly, it's not necessarily the decisions that the Planning Commission has made that affects that. Part of the issue of the quality of buildings is the Architectural Review Board in terms of their appearance and their aesthetics. That's not part of the Planning Commission. And secondly, a tremendous number of development does not go through the Planning Commission and does not go through the City Council. It's only tend to be the exceptions that go through the Planning Commission. So we might want to think about monitoring that better so that we can really see what's going on. Otherwise, development happens and we see things going up and we don't actually have a good way of measuring that. In terms of the quality, I don't think people would like to see a downtown Palo Alto being uniformly 4 stories tall as built to the 50-foot height limit. I think that a variety of buildings of the variety of heights adds some interest. I'd like to see some 1-story buildings and 2-story buildings and some 3- and 4-story buildings. And
Should we prescribe that?
well, I think that it's not necessarily that we prescribe that, but we could do that by allocating air rights to parcels that have 1-story buildings. And therefore, if you want to build, you've got to build air rights from somewhere else. And you allocate all the air rights out. And if you run out of air rights, you can't build. And that will allow the downtown cap to really be an effective cap and would promote the diversity and also make it feasible for 1-story buildings by selling their air rights to remain as 1-story buildings.
Thanks.
Gail?
Nice to see you. Welcome.
Thank you.
I have several questions. One, you mentioned the issue of an annual cap in the city of Palo Alto.
Yes.
Have you given thought as to what would be the basis for that in terms of some of the factors? And what would be the economic vitality implications of such a cap?
Recently we heard from Councilmember Schmid the comments about what the growth was for quite a long time and how the growth had dramatically increased in the last few years. And so in some sense that cap might be based on historical figures in which Palo Alto actually didn't do too bad during those periods of times. And that's a growth rate that we can manage. San Francisco actually has an annual cap and a point system, and so we could look at what other cities are doing and see what their measures are. And one of the things about this is right now the only way of getting public benefits are through the PCs. And if you have a point system, part of the points could be the public benefits that they provide without exceeding zoning allowances. And thereby we could get a diversity of issues. Higher quality architecture might, for example, be a point that you get, or the nature of the kind of development and what it provides. If you have low-income housing, that might provide additional points. So there are various kinds of things that you could do with a point system to prioritize development and moderate its growth. And I think that with a system like this, you deal with the varieties of the vagaries of the market, so that we're not continually trying to manage the market as it changes.
And how do you think we should address the issue of millennials coming forward or living here, renting here, who want to live here or want to rent or purchase housing here? And how are we going to provide that, and how are we going to provide housing for seniors who decide to move out of their single-family homes but want to stay within the boundaries of Palo Alto?
Well, that's an excellent question. Over half of the households in Palo Alto are one or two persons, and yet we have only about 4% of the housing units are studios, and less than 20% of our housing units are one bedroom. So it's clearly, in order to provide that for housing for millennials and housing for seniors, we need to provide a lot more smaller units. And I think that because we have so much housing that is 2, 3, 4, 5, and more bedrooms, we need to focus the new housing on housing for seniors and housing for millennials by having smaller units that will in turn be more affordable.
And how do you think we can provide enough of those given our land costs?
Well, smaller units are more affordable, so therefore it's easier to provide more of those.
Greg?
Thanks, and thank you for your service, Arthur. So when you were talking about the projects downtown, you talked about 1, 2, 3, 4 stories. I didn't hear you go above 4 stories. Do you advocate sticking with a 50-foot height limit in all circumstances?
Well, I think that the 50-foot height limit is worthwhile maintaining. I think that there are, we need to think of carefully.
My question was in all circumstances.
Well, let me put it this way. I did vote in favor of the project where housing is being built where Equinox, because I thought that that was a relatively minor exception to the 50-foot height limit, and because primarily it was a rental housing project with small units. And therefore, I thought that the preponderance of that project met the criteria of what I was trying to encourage. And if I had voted against it, people might have interpreted that as voting against the nature of the project. So that's an example.
What about the SurveyMonkey project where you voted, I believe, didn't you vote for 65 feet height and 2 stories of residential, and we brought it down to the 50-foot height limit?
Actually, I don't remember whether I voted in favor of the housing on top. I actually thought it should be 3 stories of office and 1 story of residential. And I would have preferred that, but the nature of that discussion didn't go in that direction.
And then the other question I had for you is, you've been on the Planning and Transportation Commission a long time, since what, 2006?
That's correct.
So do you feel like you could have done a better job on 801 Alma or Alma Plaza, which the community seems to be very unhappy with?
In terms of 801 Alma, first of all, I try that the nature of that project and its appearance is directed by the Architectural Review Board. And the quote that looks like a medieval fortress with arrows being shot out the windows is actually my quote. So other people repeat it, but I was actually the originator of that quote. And it was quoted by me in the paper. I think the Palo Alto Weekly and maybe other papers. In terms of the Alma Plaza, I actually voted against that. when it came before the Planning Commission, and I voted against it when it came back before the Planning Commission. And what happened is, in a very odd process, the PC was approved at the council level in a process that wasn't public, that people weren't really sure what they were voting on, in my not-so-humble opinion. When it came back before the Planning Commission, our hands were tied in terms of what could be approved. And so I think that that was a really horrible process that I voted against twice.
Okay, thank
Sure,
you.
nailed it there.
What was that?
I
What?
was just curious.
What'd you
Karen,
say,
I'm
Pat?
sorry, but that's time.
What'd you say, Pat?
We've gone a little over time, so thank you very much for your application.
Thank you very much.
We'll be making appointments on the 10th of November.
Thank you. Should be one who will be making ones?
The 10th of November.
I see.
Okay, our next applicant is Adrian Fine. Welcome. And our routine is that you can go ahead and give yourself an introduction, and if there's time left over, you can do a little pitch at the end, but we'd like to get to questions
Great, thank you.
for a lot in between.
So first of all, thank you all for the opportunity to come here tonight. My name is Adrian Fine. I was born and raised in Palo Alto my whole life, first in South Palo Alto, but I live in College Terrace now. I'm applying for a role in this commission because I want to see Palo Alto continue to be a thriving, vibrant, interesting, diverse, and mixed-up community. I'm a young citizen. I'm really just starting out on my career in life here, but my parents are getting older and plan to live in Palo Alto, and I do too. I work in the city for a company called Nextdoor, a private social network for neighborhoods. I bike to Caltrain every day and take the train up. So in some ways, I'm not really contributing to that job's housing imbalance. But as a young planner and citizen, my background's in urban planning, I think I'd like to bring a new perspective to the Planning Commission, something that is focused on transportation, data-driven decision-making, innovative, new best practices in placemaking, parking, and as well as familiarity with local institutions and legislation. So once again, thanks for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Great, thank you. Greg? Yeah, the Greg. This Greg.
Appreciate your enthusiasm, and I was taken with your application form. There are 3 or 4 things that jumped out at me. I wish I had a long time to talk. Well, let me focus on one of them. You said that the commission should change the dissatisfaction out in the community now. And one of the ways of doing that is to get a streamlined decision-making process plus meaningful engagement. Could you go into a little bit, how do you put those 2 things together?
So I think it's about explaining some of the planning processes that the city does follow and sometimes does not follow. I mean, in my opinion, a comp plan is a great guiding document, but it's just that, it's a guide. You actually have different development pathways that the city can take, whether that's a development agreement, building as of right, a planned community zoning. I don't think those are understood in Palo Alto. That these are options developers have, you as residents have for redoing your house and things like that. So I think there needs to be a better menu or portrayal of those options, and both a little bit of outreach. Whether that's going to the neighborhood associations, going to bring developers and the community together.
So the implication is that up front, we need to design the options available to the community. And that would lead to them to then have that meaningful engagement in a quick process.
I wouldn't say design, but I think it's important to put the non-negotiables on the table and let people know how things are going to proceed, how they won't proceed.
Good. Thank you.
Karen?
So you mentioned the Maybell project here, and I'm interested in this, so.
Mayfield.
Oh, Mayfield, I think you
Yeah.
mean Maybell.
You
need
No,
Mayfield?
Mayfield.
Mayfield, the
You
agreement.
mean Mayfield, okay. Because you just say Mayfield, okay. I
Land swap.
read it the other way. You said the best and worst of planning engagement in Palo Alto. And while the agreement's a laudable set of goals, Palo Alto's felt blindsided. So how would you have changed that? What would you have done? Or were you watching it when it was going on?
So I've been watching it for a while, but I think I'm actually a victim of this as well. The agreement started 8 years ago. I think it was reached 8 years ago, the agreement, but the discussion started years before that.
Six,
Yeah,
maybe?
it's the,
Yeah.
so maybe almost 10 years now. You know, the parks were built and everybody's like, hey, we got these great soccer fields on top of, you know, a waste site. And then like everything went quiet. And those buildings kept on going on Cal Ave with businesses and Facebook and things like that. And it was pretty interesting. And then suddenly it comes up like, oh, Stanford's going to build here. So I don't know if it's a possibility. It's just a thought, but maybe like shortening that time gap with regards to the agreement. Even I know Stanford might not be ready. They're an important partner in this as well. Maybe a bit of outreach before some of the changes did go down. I know my own neighborhood in College Terrace, they were really taken aback by some of the changes that happened. They just felt it came out of nowhere when it really didn't. It was planned, it was agreed on. Maybe just not communicated as well as it could have been on both sides, from Stanford too.
So you spent time in Philadelphia, you got some training there. So what can we learn from Philadelphia that might apply here, or not?
Maybe not so much. I mean, Philadelphia is a totally different size city with different problems.
But they have processes.
They have processes. I wouldn't say they're great, actually.
Okay.
Not some of the planning stuff. I think what they are pretty good at is with neighborhood associations and the engagement there. They bring together different groups such as the police, town watch services, the water department, and they really like bring all these heads to different neighborhoods, small little groups, and kind of just get their feedback. And then they tell citizens, you know, where they can go with this feedback. So for the water department, like, hey, please engage our Green Philadelphia plan. If you have crime issues, here's your local, you know, watch commander. Here's his cell phone. So a little bit more like just meshing of different city services at a very local level.
Okay, thank you.
I was impressed by that there.
Pat?
I'm ready.
So I actually have two questions for you. First, you make mention about some processes of design studios, planning workshops, civic outreach. Can you briefly give us a sense of how you think those might work more effectively here than what we've been doing, and what's the possibility there?
So I actually think Palo Alto is doing a pretty good job on that in the general just routine of things. Some are better attended than others. Sometimes you have squeaky wheels who show up a lot. I'm happy the city's using Nextdoor. Maybe you guys can use it for some planning engagement stuff too, if you're interested.
It's okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not.
Next question.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure I have an exact answer. I think like it's almost a shotgun approach at times.
Okay, and then second, we're in the midst of our comp plan update, but then beyond that will be another one and another one. What changes do you envision will have occurred in the community when we look back 20 or 30 years from now?
So I kind of agree with some of the previous interviewees that, you know, no growth is death. So I think Palo Alto will grow in the next 20 or 30 years. And if you don't plan for it, it happens willy-nilly to everyone's detriment. I also like to think that in 20 or 30 years, I'll be paying for parking. I'm totally okay with that. You know, like I drive.
You won't have to park your own car, it'll park for your.
Yeah, no, I like driving. I like driving. You know, I drive, I bike. I don't take the bus that often. I don't have huge parking problems personally, but I know it's a huge issue here. And I think the best way is to surface those costs to people that, you know, you're currently paying for this in services and labor. Why not just actually pay for your spot? So I think that's something that the city could look back on in 20, 30 years.
Liz?
So because, and thank you for coming, because, you know, we aren't an island. Sometimes we like to think we're an island. We like to think we can buffet ourselves, and we can't do that. So one of the things you did that I think is intriguing, we haven't talked much about this, but you were on the MTC as an intern and then as a program coordinator. As you look at transportation, and someone discussed this earlier, as you look at transportation in our city, in the Bay, you take the train, what do you think about what we're doing, what the MTC has to do with that, which has a lot to do with what we end up doing? Give us some comments on the big transportation guru in our backyard.
So I mean, the Bay Area it's like Beirut in the 80s. You know, it's like totally balkanized, and everybody's fighting their own little turf battles, which is not a good thing. Still, somehow we managed to move, you know, millions of people every day. There's been a lot of pushback versus the regional housing needs allocation, which is linked up with MTC. But the side that hasn't been talked about is, hey, like when you plan for this stuff and it's just a plan, there's also transit money with it. That's a huge benefit to the city and the region. You know, Caltrain's digging in on some of that money. I know AC is I don't know so much about VTA. They're kind of not here, it seems, sometimes. So I mean, I think like kind of meshing some of the systems together is good, but I'm actually okay with some of the allocations that are being done. It's just planning, you know, it's not building actually by the city. There is money linked to it in terms of transit connectivity and housing allocations, so those are important things I think need to be communicated to citizens, that transit also goes along with things of, you know, environmental quality, equity in terms of, you know, whether people, blue-collar folks can get to their jobs in Palo Alto. It's pretty hard right now.
Thanks.
Larry?
I want to go back to your statement about how citizens don't fully appreciate the various ways that projects get built.
Mm-hmm.
Community that matters right, and so on and so forth. I've talked about that to colleagues around the country,
Mm-hmm.
and they all would, I think, agree with you that in their communities there's always a lack of understanding. And so I'm sure that we can improve on that. So I'm looking for examples of places that do a better job, and what do they do to accomplish it?
Seattle does a pretty good job, at least in terms of things like low-income housing and environmental upgrades. They make it very clear that this is a low-income housing project that's non-negotiable. There are going to be, you know, low-income housing tenants here. At the same time, they kind of coordinate it with different services, whether that's public safety or social services. So they've done a really good job with like low-income housing and like recovery housing in terms of like actually placing it in neighborhoods that are pretty NIMBY, to be honest. In terms of environmental projects, I guess the Northwest just has such like buy-in that they don't really need to make their case there. In terms of downtown development, they've made clear arguments for like new civic buildings, whether it's the police station or City Hall.
You're talking about making arguments, but I thought earlier you were referring to a lack of citizen understanding of the processes that are possible.
Yeah, so I mean, it's about transparency around your arguments, I guess. This is another issue here. Where they're saying, like, you know, this is actually one of the things we're doing. We have to build low-income housing for our city goals of X, Y, Z. The process is through private development, but the city, the state, the feds provide, you know, low-income housing tax credits. So it's very clear. Maybe not the individual options that are available at each parcel or site are listed anywhere, but when they do it, it's pretty well communicated. At least I found when I was living there.
Seattle's always a good model for us.
Except in football.
Mark?
So you mentioned that you were born here and grew up here.
Yep.
If you don't mind me asking, when did your family move to Palo Alto?
So my parents moved here in '79.
Okay, so that was 5 years before my family moved here. And,
Mhm.
you know, what I recall from back then is, you know, back then Palo Alto was a place where middle income, or I guess even at that point starting to be upper middle income folks could
Mhm.
afford to move in here and buy a place.
Yep.
And now I live downtown and I see condos going for over $1,000 per square foot.
Mhm.
What can we do? Is there anything we can do? And that impacts us.
Mhm.
And folks kind of our generation,
Yep.
and people who want to start families here in Palo Alto. Do you think there are any things that we can do as a city to help, recreate that opportunity for young, maybe middle-income families to be able to move into Palo Alto and actually buy a place?
So I think to an extent, but maybe not what it used to be. You know, there are issues like, you know, reducing unit sizes on residential or multifamily apartments so that, you know, developers can build more units and support more people, building out supply to lower demand or at least meet it. You know, the city putting a strong foot behind low-income housing tax credits and really supporting that, whether it's for public benefit or just encouraging developers to do it because it's the right thing to do. Using what available land there is, there's practically none. Is another option. But at some point, I mean, like that's a double-edged sword of Palo Alto, right? We're a very wealthy, like privileged community, which we benefit from, but there's that flip side of it. Honestly, I'm not really sure. You know, like I'm almost 30, I still live with my parents. I don't really know the answer there. I think it's not going to be one silver bullet. It's going to be a number of things, taking a slice of the pie, trying to create programs for different income levels and groups of people, different workforces.
Thanks.
I have a quick question. This is a 4-year term, and I just wanted to know if there is any reason you might find yourself being interrupted from a 4-year term. Are you a around for good, or, yeah?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, my work is in the city, but I do live here and been here for 30 years now. It's my place.
Okay, great.
As long as Antonio's remains.
Okay.
That's your place.
As long as Antonio's remains, I'll stick in Palo Alto.
Well, you'll get that secure, I guess.
I hadn't thought of that as
We
criteria.
had that come before the planning commission
Oh,
a
man.
few years ago, and they almost didn't remain. Had to put food in.
Oh, yeah.
The other question I had is sometimes there's a hard shift from going from staff into being policy making and giving policy to council, which is the primary objective here. How do you think that will work for you?
So I haven't made that transition myself. I hadn't actually thought of it until you just asked. It's a really good question. I think there's two ways that I think about it. One, in terms of being a graduate student and like doing graduate level work where you're trying to be dispassionate about extraordinarily passionate things. That's some experience that'll do well for me. And then also moving from the public sector to a private startup is, I don't know, everybody wanted me to be crazy. Kind of. In some places, yes. In some places, no. I think it's about just like sticking to what you do know, what you've done well, and then hewing to those new rules, studying up on them, what the commission rules are. I'm not aware of them all, but I would study up hard on them and try to follow them to the best of my abilities.
Okay, great. Sorry, Gail,
Thanks
this
for applying.
this is your time, and so thank you very much for applying.
I don't have a chance to ask him a question?
No,
We're
I'm
at 15
sorry.
minutes.
Happened to me twice.
15 minutes, well, I just barely get one in.
Um,
But it was really great having you apply. Thank you
No,
very much.
Thank you all. Thanks for this opportunity.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
And David, we can go straight to our final applicant, is that correct?
Jeff's plane was late, so I recommend let us down and go, and if he calls me,
Then we can manage him.
interview him, and if he doesn't call me, his plane's too late.
Okay, great. All right, well, I appreciate you being here in time. This is, okay, Yekaterina? Is that how you pronounce your first name?
Oh, what was it?
Kate?
Was it really?
Thank you.
I can see
Kate.
that.
Kate Downing, welcome, and thank you for applying. And if you'd like to give us just a quick introduction, and then we'd probably like to get into questions.
Sure. I'd like to tell you guys a little bit about myself. So my husband and I, we've lived in Palo Alto for the last 3 years. We started out by living near University Avenue, and today we live near California Avenue. We share a home with another couple, so there's 4 of us in a single-family residence, along with 2 very cute dogs. I'm an intellectual property attorney. I've worked at VMware for the last 4 years, and I'm actually in the midst of a transition right now. I'm going to be working in a company called ServiceNow down in Santa Clara. It's a little bit of a change for me. I'm interested in joining the PTC because I think we're actually in a very serious inflection point, both because right now we are in the midst of updating, revising, creating a new comprehensive plan, but also because I think that we have reached a new level of difficulty in planning. You know, if you take out the open space in Palo Alto, which is like, what, 60% of our space, right? The rest of it, almost all of it, is horizontally built out. That means that every decision we make from here on out is going to be harder. It can no longer be, we will just place something over there. So to that end, I think that more now than ever, we really need to have a thoughtful, proactive decision-making and a more considered approach to what we're doing, because it's going to be much harder to undo it going forward, and because as we keep going, it will become more and more difficult to figure out where to put new things. To that end, I think it's really important that where we go is influenced by our community values. I think that's where we have to start. We have to start with a vision of where we want to go and how we're going to do it. And one of the things that I have been very busy with in the last several months is meeting with people in the community and asking them, where do you want to go? How do you envision the future of the city? What do you want to see? And having those kind of conversations throughout the community is one of the most important things that we can do right now before we lock people in for the next 15 years in terms of what we will and won't develop. So I think that that dialogue is going to be incredibly important to us. It's something I've already been doing and hope to keep doing, whether or not I'm part of the PTC, but if I am part of the PTC, it'll definitely benefit from that. And I also think that one of the other things that's very important to us right now is dialogue with people outside of Palo Alto. how are other cities dealing with this? What are their solutions? Have they thought of something that we haven't thought of? What kind of problems have they seen from things that we may have considered or will consider in the future? Right. I've talked to a lot of organizations and a lot of other places throughout the Bay Area, and I think that that's a great conversation for us to have, and it's one I'd love to see the Palo Alto City formally do more of. So with that, I leave you to the questions.
Great.
Okay, Gail. Welcome. Thank you for applying. A couple of things. You said you did some interviewing. That's very impressive. What were some of the findings from the interviews? What kinds of observations did people make about how they envision the future of Palo Alto?
So, you know, you get the most surprising answers sometimes. Yesterday at the meeting that I was at, we had several people who were in their 50s maybe, and their main complaint was that there was no live music in Palo Alto. I would have never thought that that would be their main complaint, but it was. Right? I mean, we had, you know, we had people who, you know, were of all ages, with all different backgrounds, and some of the things you heard were something like, why don't we have any live workspaces? What about artists? Where can we be? Where is space for us? Right? And these are the sorts of things that I don't necessarily think of. That's not really necessarily where I'm coming from, but those have been just terrific kind of additions, right? Because you know, so much of our conversation lately has been very kind of problem focused, really very much like, you know, we have traffic issues, we have parking issues, right? But some of it is opportunities, right? And that's a perfect example. You know, here's something that we could do for our culture, right? For our city, for our community, something that could bring people together, right? And that's a very kind of positive opportunity for us to take up.
And are you familiar with the term YIMBY?
Pardon?
YIMBY?
No, I don't think so.
You know what YIMBY is, right?
Yes.
YIMBY is yes in my backyard. So my question is, how do we move from NIMBY to YIMBY in the city of Palo Alto?
I think a lot of it has to do with our dialogue, and it has to do with how we engage our community. I think, you know, you'll hear a lot of statements, you know, that are very absolute and that are very unequivocal. You know, I don't want growth. I don't want more apartments. I don't want density, right? And then you really talk to people, right? And you really go underneath that and you ask, well, why do you feel that way, right? And you get to answers that are really along the lines of, oh, well, you know, I have this particular parking issue, right? Or I'm concerned with people looking into my windows, right? Or I'm concerned with how we're going to pay for it, right? So what you really get is you get that surface answer, but there's real problems underneath, right? And those are their real concerns. They're not really fighting what they term density. They're fighting the consequences of it. And the question is, what can we do to address those consequences? What can we realistically do to take a step back from that and go forward, but in a positive way that addresses that underlying concern?
Greg?
Good. Let me follow up on that. You mentioned that you are analytic, detail-oriented, fiscally focused. And you say that the goal of reaching out to the community is so that you can appropriately frame the options as we move into the process. Now, I think we are getting to the step of framing and moving into the process. So tell me a little bit about, from just what you've gathered, where you start the framing, what issues and how do you get them analytic and detail oriented?
Let me go in a direction. You tell me if I'm going in the right direction, right? I mean, right now we're looking at 4 different alternative paths that are going to be examined in EIR for the comp plan, right?
And they are done in such a way that they're moderate, little more, little less. They're not data analytic oriented. Is that where we want to be?
Well, I mean, I think that we certainly want to have data in order to go into that process, but I think you're going to get a lot of data out of that process, right? I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why it's important for those 4 options to not really be, you know, a little bit of this, tiny step forward, right? I mean, that's the reason why you want to have a wide spectrum, so that you get a wide variety of EIR data back, right? Because I think that you just won't get the data that you want if you don't have a wide spectrum.
But a wide spectrum of what? I mean, as you say, people mention a variety of things, from art space to parking to growth and to public transit. How do you narrow your framework?
Well, there's a couple of different ways that we can look at it, right? I mean, today, some of the options, for example, include limits, right? They include the idea of a cap on commercial growth, right? There are thoughts out there about a cap on residential growth in general, right? I mean, the 4th option, the net zero option, is supposed to look at different metrics that we can tie development to, you know, so that you kind of have a more fluid way of looking at things, but that's more goal-oriented. So, I mean, there's definitely other metrics that you could look at, right? I mean, one thing that you could possibly consider is actually having a commercial cap on things outside of the downtown area. Right. If you're really committed to PTOD, you're really committed to driving down the number of people who are driving, then maybe the idea is that where we grow should be in places where people are least likely to drive. Right. These are some of the things that you could consider. Right. You could consider, for instance, commercial to residential ratio, for example. You know, for every such and such development, we can have such and such more of the other kind of development, right? There's a lot of different approaches that you could take. There's a lot of different metrics that you could take. And right now, I mean, I would love to think more about that. And I'd love to think about where to go with that.
Good, thank you.
Karen.
So somebody else asked the question earlier about what you see Palo Alto looking like in, let's say, 30 years. So can you address, like, density, height, you know, all those kinds of things? And how important to density is design?
Is the question what I want it to look like in 30 years or what I think it will look like in 30 years?
I guess what you want it to look like.
Okay. I would like it to be a more diverse place. I would like it to be a place that has a greater variety of ages. Right now, we know that the number of kids in our town is growing. We know that the number of senior citizens in our town are growing. People 18 to 44 is dropping off very harshly, right? What does that mean? That means that a lot of the people who are moving in with kids, and you're not having a lot of other young people move in who don't have kids. Right, so that's, you're definitely getting a certain portion of the population. And I think our housing needs don't necessarily address that. You take someone like me, for example, right? I'm probably not gonna have kids until my mid-30s, right? So that's 17, 18 years of my life that I didn't have any kids. I didn't need to carpool anyone to school, right? Where I would have been really happy living in an apartment, right? Living next to transit. But there are not that many one-bedrooms. There are not that many studios in town.
So what's this mean Palo Alto is going to look like in your vision or your wishes?
I hope that Palo Alto continues to have a lot of the same character it does. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you a very specific example. Like, I think one of my favorite streets in Palo Alto is the Ramona Historic District. Like, I absolutely love that entire strip. I love Coupa Cafe and Nola's, and I love that interior courtyard that's there. I would love more of Palo Alto to look like that because it has a lot of public spaces where people can come spend time with each other. It's lively. There's something there during the day. There's something there during the evening, right? And you could envision more neighborhoods like that with residential on top where the city looks more like that. I would like to see that.
And the 50-foot height limit?
I think that Mayor Shepherd actually had a really good answer to this recently, which is that there's a lot we can do within the 50 height limit as it is. But if there were to be another project like the school theater, which had to be 65 feet in order to be an actual theater, then that would probably be okay. So I just, to do something like that or make a change like that, I think would require a lot of community input and a lot of community buy-in. And I don't even think that that's necessarily something that is worth tackling, particularly at this moment in time, even if we wanted to. And I'm not saying I want to, but even if we did, I don't think it's worth it when you have downtown areas that we call downtown that are still mostly one-story structures. There's still a lot to do there without ever touching the 50-foot limit.
I noticed that you've been looking a lot at the different guidelines, and including the El Camino Real and the master plan. And I wanted to get your vision of what you think El Camino is, and I know you live right off of El Camino. So what is your vision like going south? What do you see in the future?
I would love for El Camino to be more walkable. Today it's really not. I try to take my dog on a walk on El Camino sometimes because I live right next to it. It's not a particularly safe place because you're right next to the street. There's not that much buffering. There's not that much green on either side. I would love for the boulevard plan to actually take effect. And I think that part of the planning too has to be about how things are built and how closely they're spaced, right? I mean, you look at El Camino right now and it's one of our main thoroughfares, but I mean, it's filled with things that are basically automotive-centric, right? I mean, you have a lot of gas stations, you've got a lot of car washes, you got a lot of car repairs and body shops. I live next to 3 body repair shops, just within the stone's throw of me, right? Yeah, and I mean, those are all great things, but in terms of making it, if we think about where we're going to put housing in the future, and we really want to put it next to transit, right? Like, one of the places that makes sense, especially with the VTA build-out that will come, will be El Camino. But it can't be that until we actually start building in a way that you can walk a block and get to something that you might want to get to. Today, that's just not the case in a lot of parts of El Camino. And I think, like, the further south you go, kind of the more strip mall-y it looks, and that's... I'd like to see that change. I'd like to see more of the parking go behind the buildings.
Okay. All right. Well, you've got half a minute here if you'd like to give us your last pitch.
Sure.
Position?
I do want to talk a little bit about my role in the PTC, because I think you guys have asked me a lot of very policy-oriented questions. And there's sort of policy-oriented questions in the sense that you've asked me what I individually think about these things. My own personal opinion here is not necessarily going to guide my decisions for the PTC, right? I mean, I will consider myself successful if when I give you my recommendation, you know, I have elucidated it so clearly and given you so much analysis and detail and data and support that even if you disagree with where I ended up with, you felt like you read enough about it to understand why I made the decision that I did, right? So in that sense, you know, I really want this role to be about helping you guys make the best decisions that you can make. So even if you disagree with me, that's okay. The important part is that you got something important out of me. And, you know, that's what I do now, right? That's my job as a lawyer, right? I don't make decisions for my clients. I take in as much data as I can. I distill it. I tell people consequences. I give them risk assessments. And then ultimately the decision is theirs.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for applying.
All our lawyers appreciate
Yeah. Are we, yeah. So he hasn't landed. Okay. In that case, we are adjourned for the evening.